Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the JournalismAI Festival. It's session 3 for the day, and I'm Lakshmi, a community coordinator with JournalismAI, and I will be the host for this particular session. The JournalismAI Festival is a celebration of the most exciting developments at the intersection of journalism and artificial intelligence. So over the past week, we've been hosting conversations and case studies about the use of artificial intelligence in newsrooms across the world. It's been hosted by us, the team at JournalismAI, and we are a project of POLIS, the journalism think tank at the London School of Economics and Political Science. It's supported by the Google News Initiative. If you go to the website journalismai.info, you'll find a lot of practical information as well as resources about how to use artificial intelligence in your news organizations. For example, most recently, we published the AI Journalism Starter Pack, which contains some of the most pressing questions and answers that the community members have posed to us about getting started with artificial intelligence in the newsroom. And here are now some recommendations from us on how to enjoy the festival. First things first, if you have any questions at all for our speakers, make sure to put it in the YouTube live chat. We will be monitoring it periodically, and we will pose it to the speakers at the end of their conversation. If you aren't already a part of our community on Telegram, make sure to join in. It's at t.me/journalismai. If you plan on tweeting about this session or sharing on social media, make sure to use the hashtag JournalismAI. And if you want to know what else we have in store for you, we have one more day of programming left. You can go to the website journalismaifestival.com to find the complete program. And last 2 points, if you're not already signed up for the newsletter, make sure to sign up for it. And I'm not saying this just because I work here, but it's got some great content on it and you don't want to miss out on it. And finally, the most important recommendation of all, be open, be curious, and be kind, because we are all here to learn from each other, and that's the best way to go about doing so. And now, before I get to the session of the hour, I just want to remind you that at 4:15 p.m. today, we have another session called Bridging AI Ethics and Journalistic Standards, where we talk about the use of AI in newsrooms and the ethical implications that come with it. So don't miss out on this session. And now for the session of the hour, which is holding AI accountable, the reporter's take. We have a brilliant panel up for you, and we have an even more brilliant moderator to take the lead on this panel. So I'd like to invite Marina Guevara of the Pulitzer Center to take the floor.
Thank you so much, Lakshmi, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. The impact of predictive and surveillance technologies on individuals and communities around the world is one of the most important and urgent stories of our time. And it is not just a technology story, but a deeply human story and a social justice one. If unchecked and unaccountable, algorithms have the potential to discriminate and harm the most vulnerable members of society, deepening social and economic gaps and amplifying racial bias. So how do we hold artificial intelligence accountable? And is the journalism field prepared to tackle this challenge? We have an all-star panel today of journalists who have been leading the field, pioneering algorithmic accountability in Europe and in the US for the past several years. They are at the forefront of designing research methods to report about AI and with AI in the public interest. So let me introduce them briefly, then we will have short presentations, and then we will start our conversation. So please get your questions coming. We really look forward to those. So let's get started with Surya Mattu. Surya is an investigative journalist, artist, and engineer who looks at the ways in which algorithm systems perpetuate systemic biases and inequities. He's a senior data engineer and a data journalist at the Markup. Köppen leads the AI and automation lab at the Bavarian broadcaster in Germany. And she also co-leads VR Data, which is the investigative data journalism team. Welcome, Uli. And Melissa Heikkilä is Politico's Europe AI correspondent. She is the author of AI Decoded, a weekly newsletter on AI policy and politics. And Melissa, the newsletter is celebrating its first anniversary this week, so congratulations, 40,000 readers strong. So to get us started, for the first section of the panel, as I said, we are going to have each participant briefly address an aspect of AI accountability that connects with their work. We will start with Surya, who will talk about holding the platforms accountable, an area in which he has done groundbreaking work. So Surya, the virtual floor is all yours.
Thanks, Marina. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Surya Mattu, and I'm really excited to be here as a part of this panel. I'm just going to talk through one project we've been working on at the Markup called Citizen Browser. I'll go through the details, and hopefully that'll provide some kind of ideas of the different research methods we're trying out to hold the platforms accountable. So before I start, I just want to give a quick heads up on the Markup. We're a nonprofit newsroom focused on investigating how powerful institutions are using technology to reshape society. Our work is really data-driven. We try to build the evidence on the ground of what's actually happening with algorithmic systems rather than trying to hypothesize what could be happening. So a lot of our work is really trying to see where this data is being created at the level of the user or the person who has to interact with it, not at the top level view of what could be happening. So with that in mind, Citizen Browser, which is the project I'm going to talk about, is exactly that kind of project where we were interested in trying to figure out how to monitor Facebook. And when we say monitor Facebook, we were really interested in trying to understand how Facebook's algorithms were recommending content to the people using that platform. So we were really trying to measure the content that was being shown in the public square of Facebook, which is not really an easy thing to do given the existing tools that exist. So John Hedgeman, one of the heads of the newsfeed, actually. So the reason we even decided to go down this road is because the only tool that let you monitor like the level of interaction with content on Facebook was Facebook provided a tool called CrowdTangle. And when we started this project, CrowdTangle, and I think it's still true, and CrowdTangle only provides information about how much different posts are being interacted with. So how many people are liking them or like liking them, disliking them, hearting them, whatever, or sharing them. It didn't actually provide information on how much content was being viewed and who was viewing it. So that was like the first step in our process, was actually figuring out what metrics we wanted to use to measure in order to determine what could be happening on these platforms. So rather than measuring interaction, we were really interested in measuring reach or viewership. So what was actually being shown to people by the systems, not how they were interacting with that content. So what we did was we built a web browser, essentially. We already didn't build a web browser. We wrapped a web browser in an app called the Markup Research app that we provided to a panel of paid panelists. This was basically a group of people close to representative of the United States, and essentially they downloaded our app, logged into Facebook through it once, and then it just collected data from them in the background. If you are familiar with the Nielsen ratings for television, it's a similar model where basically we paid people to share their Facebook data with us so that we could do kind of survey level questions and research around what was happening on the platform. So what did we collect from the platform? We collected the Facebook timeline. We collected the ads that were being shown, the links that were being shown to users, and the posts from groups that were public. We were also collecting the suggested Facebook groups and the suggested pages. We were really, really concerned about privacy breaches and the implications with privacy related to this sort of data collection. So we actually redacted the majority of what we collected. This is a screenshot from a groups page that shows you the pink parts that are redacted out are what we don't see. So any personally identifiable information we actually remove from the post. So we don't even know, for example, who's posting on someone's newsfeed unless they're an advertiser or it's a public post. We only see what links are being shared on it. So we really constrained the amount of data we were collecting to things that we felt comfortable would not leak PII. And actually maintaining this was a real challenge because Facebook keeps dynamically updating its HTML. So we had to make sure we had to build an entire infrastructure and parsing and redaction system that was constantly monitoring the HTML coming in so that we were constantly up to date with the redactions. It was kind of interesting. We actually got into the state where A/B testing was influencing our software because we had to make sure we were accounting for all versions of Facebook and the way we redacted it. So as I said, we did not monitor what people were doing on Facebook. We really focused on monitoring what Facebook was recommending, to users. That was the core question we were trying to answer. And again, the reason we built the platform the way we did was we couldn't answer questions like what groups were being recommended, which studies have shown is one of the core ways in which misinformation has spread through Facebook over the last few years. And and if you have if you use the Facebook API, group recommendations that users are seeing isn't a part of that API at all. So that kind of information, there wasn't other ways to collect other than the way we were trying to go about it, or we've gone about it rather. So like I said, we've assembled a representative sample of Facebook's algorithmic actions. The custom web browser runs in the background. It collects data up to 3 times a day. It doesn't see how users are using the data at all, how users are using the platform at all. It's really just focused on what's being recommended, and we use that to carry out our reporting. So one more time: recruit the panel, pay them, set up the browser, collect the data, report out, and maintain the browser. Those are essentially the 5 steps of the Citizen Browser project. So like I said, we were focused on reporting on the data we collected about Facebook, not measuring Facebook's intent. And this is a really important point we've learned with any sort of algorithmic accountability project. It's really important to be precise about what you're calling out in your reporting, because with this sort of system, it's often that the reason that harm takes place is because someone didn't think about that problem, not because they tried to specifically introduce that problem or cause that harm. So we had to be really precise about what we were seeing and how we were seeing it, so it wasn't misrepresenting what was actually happening on the ground or what Facebook's intent was. And from our perspective, we aren't interested so much in what the platform's intent is. We were really interested in seeing what it actually looked like in the data on the ground. So this is an example of a story we did in January of last year, soon after the Capitol riots. Facebook came out right after the riots and said they've basically stopped recommending political groups on the platform because of what happened in the riots. And we found that that actually wasn't true. We found in our panel that even after Facebook made the comment and said that they had stopped recommending groups, we still found them being recommended in our panel. After we published our story and shared the data, we saw, and Senator Markey from the Democratic senator tweeted about it and shared it with the platform. They then updated something, admitted that there was some mistake in their code, and then it finally dropped. So that graph you see where it drops down in the end, that drop comes after we actually published our story and showed this evidence. And I think this story is a good example of why you need independent auditing of these systems. Again, it's not about Facebook's intent. I'm sure Facebook thought using their AI that they had managed to stop all political groups, but culture moves faster than the speed of AI even. I know we always talk about law that can't keep up with tech, but I don't think tech can keep up with culture. And that is something that only humans can really do meaningfully well. And one of the reasons I think this sort of independent auditing is important is because it allows people from different perspectives to look at what's happening on the platform. We also build tools like Split Screen, which you can go to now. It's the markup.org/split screen, and it's basically a real-time feed of what different demographic groups of our panel were being recommended on the platform. So it's really the first lens into what the red feed, blue feed looks like, and other things like that. So with that, I'll say thank you, and I'll stop here. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Surya. That was great. I invite the audience to send questions if you have any questions for Surya. And we're going to move now to Uli. And in addition to the platforms, there are many other AI actors that are deploying algorithm systems. And that is exactly what Uli is doing, is investigating with her team how those systems are working and how they're shaping society. So welcome, Uli. And we look forward to hearing about your team.
Thank you so much, Marina. And thanks for the kind introduction. I'm Uli Köppen. I'm part of Bavarian Broadcasting, and we try to condense the how, the why, and also the questions in our head concerning algorithmic accountability reporting. I am part of 3 teams, our AI and automation lab, our investigative data team, and also our investigative colleagues. And what we are doing is we are using algorithms and automation for journalism, and we're using it for investigative journalism and also for automated formats. This is our mission. Today, we want to focus on the investigative part and also on algorithmic accountability reporting, which is a field we are specializing in for some years now. We have published stories on a scoring algorithm, for example, that is scoring German citizens. We have recently published a story on a vaccination algorithm that seems to disadvantage elderly people, and also on Facebook and how it fails to detect hate speech on its platform, and also a food delivery service called Lieferando and how it's surveilling its riders. What I want to focus on today is a story we published this February on AI recruiting software. And this story is about a phenomenon we were observing. The phenomenon goes like this. The first round in a lot of assessment centers in the US works with video tools right now. So the applicant is sitting in front of a screen and they're talking to their camera. A short video is done, and certain vendors, there are several vendors, promise to extract personality traits out of these videos. And what we wanted to do is not only to look at this phenomenon, but also to look at how this software really works. So we set up an experiment, and we were looking at social science methods to do this. Our experiment was twofold. The first experiment we did was with an actress, and we did that because we wanted to see how robust the software is working. So our actress was repeating the same words with the same tone of voice and the same mimics over and over again. And we wanted to see if the output of the software is always the same. And what the software does, it gives you 5 personality traits and assesses you according to a certain personality model. And as you can see here, as soon as the actress changed her appearances, meaning she put on glasses, or she put on a headscarf, or she just changed her outfit, the output was different, and it was significantly different. You can see the blue line, which is the original, and you can see the yellow line, which is the result with glasses in this case, and you can see that it is different. The next experiment was a technical experiment, because of course, if you're working with a human, in this case our actress, even if you're using the same words or if you're using the same tone of voice, of course, the result is different. And we wanted to see what happens if you are keeping every variable in a video constant, but if you're only changing one variable. In this case, we changed the background. You can see a white wall and a bookshelf, and you can see the different outputs the software gave us. The original one, again, is the blue line, and the one with the bookshelf is the yellow line. So it was largely different. And what was interesting, we couldn't really manipulate the software in terms of every time we used the bookshelf, this person seemed to be more open. That was not the case. It was very different for different persons. And to sum up, what we found with this software is that it's highly risky to use this kind of software for a process like hiring, when a person is really depending on a job, when the personality traits that should help assess if a person really fits into a team is dependent on if they wear glasses, or if you're in front of a bookshelf or in front of a white wall. So this is the kind of reporting we want to do more. And what we try to do to have some takeaways for you after this session is we condensed some simple learnings, looking at the scope, at the storytelling, and at the mission of this kind of reporting. So what is relevant for us when we choose a story and when we choose to report on a story is how relevant is it for a majority of people. So this is what you're always doing as an investigative journalist. You look at how important is the story for people's lives. But in this case, it is not so obvious, because sometimes you are also reporting on technology because it's interesting. For us, it is a human story, as Marina just said when she opened the session. And we had to assess how relevant is it for people. In this case, we were looking at the US, and we saw that there is a market leader called HireView, and they have hundreds of customers. There are a lot of assessment centers there working like this, and this phenomenon is coming to Europe. So this was enough for us to really report the story. what is important for our storytelling is people are the angle. It's not the technology. This is why we decided for this design. So the starting point when you're coming to the webpage, we are reporting the story, are the people in front of the camera, because it's their lives that depend on the outcome of the software, or at least can depend on the outcome of the software. And this is what we always try to do, to put people in the center of our storytelling. We have to balance to explain our experiments versus to explain the meaning of the story for people's lives. And this usually is not easy because the experiments are difficult to explain. We have to make sure everyone understands what we do, but at the core of the story has to be the meaning for people's lives. Oh, sorry, that was too fast. I don't know if you can read it down here, but in this case, it means that the software really can transport stereotypes, and that this could potentially cost people the job. Our mission, usually when we look at this kind of reporting, is to debug the system. And the system in this case is not only the technological system, it is society. And this is really important to keep that in mind, because of course those systems can amplify certain biases or disadvantages for people. And this is why we have to really look closely at this kind of systems. But what is behind that is still society and the biases that are already there. So to have this as an important part of the debate we are sparking is very important for us as a team, and I think is important for the beat in general. And another balance we have to have in mind when we report on technology and on AI is, of course, we want to hold people, firms, governments accountable who are using algorithms. And if there are any disadvantages, of course, we want to report that. And there's also a study I posted you here. It's a study by the Bertelsmann Foundation, and they say that there's a lot of positive reporting on tech and AI. If there's a new device coming out, a new software coming out, a lot of people are praising that. That's the green bar you can see here. And the red bar is the critical reporting. So there is still a lack of critical and accountability reporting in this area. So it's good that we're doing that. But on the other hand, there is a very interesting article by Jonathan Stray, and by the way, he's going to be in the next panel I saw. And he said, when reporters find a suspect algorithm, they should also try to cover what could be done better. So to have kind of a constructive algorithmic accountability reporting or beat is something we haven't mastered yet, I think, as teams, but also as a journalism bubble, I think. And this is something we can still get better, and which is still a question mark in my head, because this is something we haven't reached yet. So if you have any questions, reach out, and I'm very much looking forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uli, for that and for the important work your team is doing. From these two presentations, we can see how fast the AI field is moving and evolving. Are regulators keeping up with all these developments or playing catch up? That is what Melissa is going to tell us next.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for the kind introduction and the really interesting presentations. I work for Politico Europe. I'm based in London, and I follow AI policy and regulation all around the world. But today I'm going to focus on Brussels and the EU specifically. So quickly about Politico, we're nonpartisan. We're founded in the US. We've been in Europe since 2015, and really treat politics like we're like a politics newswire. We follow regulation and politics intensely. And I do that every week in AI Decoded, which is a newsletter on AI policy and politics. And I don't have a technical background. I studied political science, which I think is actually the perfect lens to look at AI policy through. And I thought today I would walk you through in a really concrete way how I report on policy. AI is like, I think, this perfect mix between technology and geopolitics, where governments are really, really understanding that it's a really consequential, important technology that can have real world harms if not reined in. And I think especially in the West, people are really anxious about authoritarian governments such as China using AI. So there's a real big international push to come up with rules that are meaningful. And today I'm going to talk about one particular rule, which is the EU's AI Act. Now, this is a screenshot from a leak we had in spring. Now, before this, there'd been a lot of talk in Brussels about the need to regulate AI, and we can't. Europe doesn't want to have mass surveillance, or we want to have ethical AI, and Europe really likes to think of itself as the world's tech regulator. So before this leak, we had no idea what that would be. There was lots of political messaging, but nothing concrete. And the European Commission, which drafts regulation, likes to leak these documents a few weeks before they unveil them to test the public reaction and get some unofficial feedback. Maybe there's some internal political debate they want to solve, or they just want to see how it would go down, or prepare companies and lobbyists, better. But this was a leak I got a few weeks before the regulation came out in April. And these leaks are really important because the European decision-making process isn't very transparent. So these are like a key document to get to understand what are regulators thinking and to really start a conversation around this regulation. So after this leak, I think there were 2 different open letters with hundreds of MEPs calling for stricter rules. This particular leak had some really strong language. The controversial articles there were a call for a ban on mass surveillance and banning AI systems that manipulate people to their detriment, which, as you can imagine, might have freaked out some of the platforms. But 2 weeks later, when the regulation actually came out, this is what it was. It's a product safety framework for high-risk AI uses that are likely to harm people. For example, the AI hiring software that Uli mentioned, that would be classified as high risk and would fall under the regulation. The regulation also has some bans for unacceptable AI uses, such as social scoring, and it restricts the use of facial recognition technology from law enforcement unless it is to fight serious crimes such as terrorism. And right now, the biggest political fights in Brussels are how to define AI, what should be classed as high risk, and how far to take bans on AI uses. And I think the AI Act really beautifully illustrates the different stages of regulation and where you need to pay attention and who you should really be bugging. Before we had the leak, the Commission was consulting different stakeholders and really trying to understand what people want. And that's a really good opportunity, I think, to identify key players, who has an axe to grind, what are the different camps that are starting to form. And then when we have the leak, you can finally find out, what is the Commission thinking and start a conversation. It's also an annoying strategy from the Commission because they like to leak things to test the waters without actually being held accountable. So when you later ask them, but in this leak, you had stronger wording, what happened to it? They'll always deny they know anything about the leak. And then when the regulation is presented, then that's a really good opportunity to ask commissioners, you have the actual regulation, and you can hold, when they say they want to ban mass surveillance, what do they actually mean? If you look at the AI Act, there's lots of political messaging that we have to ban it, we don't accept mass surveillance, but the regulation doesn't actually do anything like that. It has lots of exceptions. It allows law enforcement to use it and doesn't ban private companies from using facial recognition technology in public places, for example. Right now, we're in the 4th stage, which is negotiating the regulation. So the European Parliament and EU countries debate the bill separately and come up with their own versions. And there you have lots of lobbying as well, and lots of leaks. So it's really good to know these camps and what people think, because then you can go back to what you had and have this body of work and understand how the conversation is developed and where is it going next. And finally, I put together this bingo. These are keywords that I often hear in the AI policy debate that I think that always make my antennas go up. When regulators talk about de facto bans, like they did for the AI Act, if you look at the actual regulation and read it, it's not a de facto ban, it's barely a ban. It's just simply some restrictions. Pro-innovation rules often mean no rules or self-regulation, as does anything that stifles innovation. And right now there's a lot of talk about China, especially in the US, about China and defending democratic values, or tiptoeing around or mentioning China, but not really mentioning China. So for example, lots of international initiatives at the UN, for example, want to ban social scoring, which is a system that China has popularized. So yeah, so anytime you see these in an AI policy document, or hear a regulator or a policymaker or a politician talk and mention these, I would just watch out. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And we are going to get started with our conversation. So we have a question already in the chat. We look forward to more. I want to start with you, Melissa. So how do you keep track of all this noise? How do you cut through the noise and keep your reporting really audience-centered and relevant to real humans in real communities when you are constantly navigating through so many positions and interests and lobbying and so on?
It's really intense and it's really hard. I think you just have to quickly identify the key issues. What are things that actually matter to people? There's a lot of lobbying about absolutely everything from impact assessments to conformity or data protection. But if you identify things that really matter to people, or am I being surveilled walking down the streets, or how is this software going to affect my life? When you talk about things that actually matter to people, I think that's probably the best way to do it. But also, when you talk to politicians, you get a real sense of which parties find what things people find problematic. And having lots of conversations, and you just have to try to distill those into one clear thought. It's not there's no obvious answer.
Uli, do you think that we are succeeding at making this reporting really relevant to people and to their everyday lives? Have you experienced any challenges getting people to care about the reporting that you are putting out?
This really is a constant struggle in the storytelling and in forming a story. We have a lot of discussions within our team. What is the angle? How do we start? We are fighting over each sentence, more or less, which is good and very tiring, I would say. But this is the only way to really have a human-centered look at technology. And this is what we are also trained for. So this is part of our storytelling process. But can you have that as a I would say journalism bubble as well? Can you have some quality? Check if the story is really human-centered. We don't have a framework there yet, and this is something I would love to work on together with other journalists, and which is also part of the ethics questions we are dealing with. So we also published our ethic guidelines, because we are a team that is using AI for products. So we are using this technology and we are reporting on this technology. So we have a twofold role. And ethics is important for both. And this, I would say, is part of the ethics debate. Can we really make that human-centered? And I think a lot of the tech reporting that is still out there is kind of not in that corner. So there is still a challenge that we have to come over.
Surya, at the Markup, you strive to empower readers and to give them a sense of agency about their relationship with technology. So can you talk a little bit more about how you go about that and what you have learned in the process from your audience, from your readers?
Sure. Yeah, so that's something that we think a lot about. It's something I say that internally all the time, which is that, with technology, it's so easy, it's so abstract what the harms are, and it's so distributed that it's often hard for people who don't have like the technical literacy to understand how to extrapolate what is the thing you're finding to what is the harm in society. So I think we try to approach it in two different ways. One is, for some of the reporting, we basically don't um, we don't try to we try to speak to a more technical audience and be specific about what the harms are, and hope that that provides a foundation on which then more meaningful storytelling can build, but use that as the basis. A joke I always say at the Markup is, when we release a new investigation, often the first tweets are, "Oh, so surprising, no one knew that was happening," like, snarky responses of like, we're stating the obvious, but what we're trying to do is state them with facts, right? And then use those facts to then help other people to raise the level of the conversation, to make it more specific so that we can discuss the nuance. So that's one side. And then on the other side, I think we also try to build tools like Blacklight, which is like a real-time privacy website inspector, where individuals can see how the relationship they have with technology is affected by the things we're reporting on. So Blacklight lets you see, for a website you use every day, which companies are tracking you on it, lets you download the data, and then ask the people who make that website why they allow this sort of tracking. So it kind of gives them agency, in the sense that it lets you kind of start a line of inquiry based on your own experience, so that you can make the choices yourself. We really try not to be prescriptive about what the solutions are, because we don't know, and we think this space is constantly evolving. But what we see our role as is to give really specific problems that we have identified in the space.
And Uli, you talk about ethical frameworks, and I see that in both cases you are intensely working and making readers part of the research process, whether by having them share their searches with you in the Citizen browser, whether, Uli, by working with actors or with other readers or citizens as part of the experiments that you share. So what are some of the ethical challenges that have come up through the process?
Well, most of the ethical challenges we are facing is like using AI as journalists, and we're using it for innovations. We want to push our technological stack further. We want to personalize with a public service flavor. This is something where we have to look at the same things more or less than other industries, like the tech industry. The same challenges here. We should look at the training data. We should look that there are no biases in the training data. We should not try to exclude people from the results as a public service broadcaster. We have to make it accessible for everyone. We have to be transparent. And in the investigation process, we have a big practice as a data team already to be transparent about our research methods. So when we are doing such an investigation, like the one I just showed, we always try to explain within the story how we did it. And this is the balance to make the storytelling not too boring, because those explanations are very, very boring, and we have to make it readable. And we always try to publish another, let's say, methods page, where you can dive into the methods and really read how we did it. And this is what we did for a long time as a data team, and what I think is very important in using algorithms.
And it looks like Mattia has shared some of the PR's ethic guidelines here in the chat for those who are interested. We also have a question for Uli related to the experiment that she was sharing before, and the question is whether you get whether you get access to the software. Did HireView give you access, or how did that process work?
Oh, it was not HireView. HireView is just the market leader in the US, and the US was my starting point, because when I did a fellowship in the US, I saw those assessment centers, and this really made me wonder how this works, and this is how we got into this whole story. We looked at a startup in Munich, and we have to protect our source there. Sorry.
Okay. That's totally fair. Melissa, in the introduction to the newsletter, AI Decoded, you say that you will tell readers things that powerful people and companies don't want them to know. What are some of those things that powerful individuals these days don't want regular citizens to know in the AI field?
Just how much from companies, just how much they know about you. And because I think anyone would be extremely creeped out by that. And how much of their actual business model is based on that exploitation. I think that is a key point. And I think when it comes from politicians, they love to say they're doing everything they can to both protect people and boost innovation and create jobs. But often those two, they can coexist, but it's difficult, right? Like if you ban AI systems and manipulate people to their detriment, what does that actually mean? That will probably ban Facebook, and I don't think any government wants that. So that it is a tricky balance, and I think politicians, don't want to know how much they are actually influenced by government platforms.
Surya, this brings you back to the importance of independent investigative journalism. And you have said before that we need investigative journalism on big tech to be not so financially beholden to the companies that it is trying to cover. And there is a reality that there is a financial crisis in the journalism industry, and big tech is underwriting tools and giving grants and doing revenue sharing agreements and so on. So how do we solve this conundrum? Easy questions for you.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I had this answer, I would be going and doing it. I think at the moment, what we've seen happen in the last few years is a lot of funding from rich donors and wealthy institutions for the nonprofit newsrooms. I don't know how sustainable that model is, but it is something that's coming up in the US a lot, especially as systemic inequality is increasing in the world. But I think more than anything else, I feel like when I started doing this work, like whenever it was, there was a lot more like pushback from people about like why, like they're like, go look at the bankers. Why are you looking at tech companies? These are the good guys. They're the ones who are going to make the world better. And I feel like I've seen a big shift in how we perceive that now, almost to the other extreme, where now everything a technologist does is just bad because it's technology. And I think somewhere in the middle is the balance. And hopefully, the problem of like funding journalism is bigger than this ecosystem. And Marina, I actually feel like the work you've done in the past is like a good example of how you can build meaningful collaborations across countries, because I think that's the future. I think building those kind of collaboration across countries, across contexts is really the way we can, like, that's what I wish I could do. I wish I could like work with people like Uli, like Melissa, across the world on the same technology stories to really show what this looks like the way the companies can see it, which none of us can in our silos. So I'm just going to segue into what I dream for, not what I know how to do.
Let's do it.
The doors are always open.
Nothing is stopping you. But I would also push it one step further. How do we include our colleagues in the global south? One of the things that troubled me about the Facebook papers, for example, was that while the whistleblower and others said that this story was so important because it showed the harm on platforms' harm on communities in the global south, there were no global south journalists involved in that collaboration. On the other hand, there's a whole services industry that surrounds the development of AI that is actually taking place in the global south, whether for data gathering or data labeling in places where there are less stringent privacy laws. So who is looking at that? And why are we not already working in those collaborations?
I can speak to one point of that from personal experience, which is with Citizen Browser, we have tried international collaborations. We did one in Germany with Süddeutsche Zeitung. Sorry, my pronunciation is terrible, for the German elections. And we've also looked at bringing the panel to the global south at places like India and Brazil for doing the same reporting. We ran across some very fundamental challenges where the kind of technical literacy needed in the newsroom to be able to actually do this work without leaking PII or causing that kind of challenge, it just required resources that a lot of organizations don't have yet. And I think what we really need to enable that is serious funding to send to those organizations that are doing the on-the-ground reporting to support the data side. I feel like one thing that we are privileged with in the West is that we get to have these jobs like mine and Uli's. I think in the global south, it's much harder, and a part of the job should be to help fund that work to make it possible to build the bridge.
Melissa, how is the regulation story playing out in the global south? Because we are talking so much about US and Europe, but are there interesting, surprising trends in other countries?
Yeah, Brazil is actually working on their own AI law, which is quite interesting. They're quite far along with it. And in Africa, they're really into it. Lots of African countries are adopting GDPR or like a data protection regime that is very similar to GDPR, which is not something America is doing, for example. And they're really, a lot of African countries are enthusiastic partners in UNESCO, which just adopted an ethical framework for ethical AI. And I think these countries think that, if they want to start developing AI, they might as well do it well from the beginning, right? So then they think that a lot of them are excited about these frameworks and really keen to adopt them because of this reason. Whereas, in America, with a more established AI sector, I think getting regulation through is a lot more difficult.
I want to talk about a couple of things, and unbelievably, we are at time, but we're going to take a few more minutes. I wanted to ask about the pushback that you are experiencing to your reporting, but specifically thinking about people who are entering the algorithmic accountability field. What can they anticipate from big tech when they go about these stories? What are some of the tactics that you are seeing and that you can warn other people about? I don't know, Uli, if you want to go first.
Well, I can't answer to all those regulation questions. I guess that's Melissa's part. Of course, if you're working to investigate proprietary algorithms, it's very, very hard to get your hand on the data. And it's very hard to really audit an algorithm. And it was a big part of the investigation to really find a way to do that. And this is part of the problem in Europe, that a lot of the algorithms that are used are proprietary, even when they're used by the government. So, of course, you can then use FOIA, the German version of FOIA, to get, for example, emails or conversations about this algorithm, but you can't really lay your hands on the data or see how this algorithm really works. So this is kind of a structural pushback, which makes it really hard to report on this whole beat. But I think it's still worth it. It's also something that is not really something we can solve. This is how the tech world works, and this is how we have to find a way around that. But there is, unfortunately, not a standard way. And this is something that we find also very troubling. For each investigation, we have to set up an own experiment. We have to find our own way to really report on this algorithm, which makes this work so long and strenuous, and prevents us from getting out lots and lots and lots of stories around that. And this is why I love to see the kind of reporting Melissa does, because this is a very, very smart way to get around this, to report on policymaking, politics, and the debate around that, because this is a very, very important part of the whole pie.
Surya or Melissa, who wants to go next?
Oh, well, I'm happy to. There's just an intense amount of lobbying. Like, it's intense. And but a really sneaky thing that I've noticed that tech companies do, they often fund, or they like to infiltrate research institutes or universities, or fund them. I'm not sure if infiltrate is a fair word, but fund research that looks legitimate, at the University of Oxford or Cambridge, that just happens to support whatever goal they have. Or they have research institutes, that are supposedly independent, but are receiving money from Google and then pushing out research that is essentially copy-paste from Google's position paper. But it's tricky to spot that, because it looks very legitimate. It looks like a proper research, and I'm sure, and there has been a lot of work done behind it, but I don't know. I think the relationship between the two isn't as transparent as it maybe should be.
Surya?
I would just add that especially for people who are coming into the space new, I think the first thing to keep an eye, like the thing you have an advantage of with a fresh set of eyes is what are the implicit assumptions being made by everyone and how they're talking about things. So, for example, when we started looking at Facebook, impressions meant reach, right? People thought that like how many things, the way Facebook was talking about things being liked was how people were perceiving things being shown to people. And there's actually a world of a difference between those two things. So I think if you're coming in kind of to Melissa and Uri's points, like there's a lot of lobbying happening both at the policy level, but also at the technical level, right? Like a lot of the open source tools for AI are built by Facebook and Google, and some of the best open source tools come from the researchers who work at these companies. So they have it at both ends. So like actually just keeping your eyes open for what the implicit assumptions are that exist in those tools often reveals the values and ideologies of the people building them. So I would say that's a good place to start.
And unfortunately, to close out, I would like to ask each of you, because I would love to continue talking for a long time, I would like to ask each of you to offer the top piece of advice for journalists who are entering the algorithmic accountability field. Why don't we go first with Uli?
I would say you don't need a big team. It's great to have a team and to add to your skills. This is what I always did, to look for people who had different skills than I did. So that's one possibility, to dive into that field. The other possibility is to really focus on what Melissa does, like policy making, really trying to use your investigative methods you have from other parts of the journalism field for this field, because it's absolutely possible and there is still a lot of space for that.
Thank you, Uli. Melissa?
Network and get everyone's WhatsApp or Signal number.
That's it. Extremely precise and important. Surya?
I'm just going to double down and find the assumptions that are being made and work with people to figure out how to challenge them.
Thank you so much, Surya, Uli, and Melissa. Thank you for leading the way. Thank you for creating the footprints that so many of us are going to follow in years to come. And thank you for your generosity to share your advice. So more power to you. And I turn it over now to Lakshmi to close this off.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Uli. Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, Surya. Thank you all for taking the time out to talk about all of these issues with us. Up next, we have a great session on bridging AI ethics with journalistic standards, which we've co-designed with Partnership on AI. Make sure you catch it. See you then.